Hello and welcome to Faith Matters. This is the programme where we take a spiritual perspective on Merseyside life. Our theme for today is faith in politics, and our guests in the studio are City Councillors Lana Orr and Jane Corbett. Welcome. Now, I'm going to ask you about how long you've been City Councillors, because Jane, you're an old stager.
An old hag, I thought you were going to say.
No, I was going to say an old stager. And Lana, you're a newbie.
I'm a newbie. Yeah.
So Jane, how long have you been at this?
2002.
2000?
So not that long.
No,
not that long.
But you've been involved in local politics for a long time, haven't you?
I've been involved in community campaigning, community politics with a small p since 81. Yeah.
And what ward do you represent?
The Everton ward, where I live and have lived for a long time.
You've been in Everton a long time?
Yeah, first came to Everton in 1974 to help out with the play scheme when I was 17. Came back in 75, got married to Henry, been there since then, since 79.
And you came up from the south?
Came up from the south, yeah. I was born in the middle of London in Islington and then lived on the edge of London and then lived in Norwich. Yeah, so I've been all around the place, but this is my home, so.
No, you've got a Scouse accent.
Only a little one. You haven't met our kids.
Maybe that'll happen to me. Here's hoping, eh? Yeah. And Lana, you come from a long tradition of Labour politicians.
Well, yeah,
in Liverpool.
My granddad was a Labour councillor for, over 40 years. He represented the Vauxhall ward. I was very little, actually, when he was a councillor, so I tend to hear more about my actual granddad's work life from people now than when I was at home being a little, because he was quite humble, my granddad, at home. So, you know, he didn't necessarily say, oh, I was doing this today, I got someone a house. He wasn't necessarily like that. He was quite humble about it, quite self-deprecating, to use something that you said earlier. So yeah, my granddad was a big influence on why I wanted to get involved. But he passed away when I was 16, so I didn't actually get involved until much later. Didn't actually join the party until I was around 22.
Really?
Which is quite late by some standards now, because now we have members who are 14, 15, 16 who are getting involved, you know, from really early ages. But I didn't get involved in student politics or anything. I was always not shy, because I'm really chatty, but at university I was slightly not as assertive to go into those type of arenas, you know, the big debating societies or anything. So I did get involved relatively late for, you know.
So how old were you when you were elected?
23, so it was quite a quick.
You joined the party when you were 22,
yeah,
and you were elected when you were 23.
Yeah, it was a really quick turnaround, actually really unexpected, and for me, because I always knew I wanted to get involved in local politics, but I thought it'd be, you know, maybe when I was 40, I'd have the chance of possibly being able to stand. And I think the way that the political situation was locally, there was a point when we started to win seats that we never dreamed that we'd start winning. West Derby, actually, where I'm the councillor for, was probably always one of those wards that was never necessarily seen as a natural Labour area and was never really high on target lists. So, yeah, it happened really quickly.
Were you involved in schools parliament at all?
No, nothing.
Oh, interesting.
At school, I was never necessarily... My teacher, a lovely woman who I'm still in touch with, called Michelle Haywood, she always used to call me a political animal. But she said, you've actually got to start going and you know, actually exploring that. Yeah. And I always said, oh, no, not for me. It's you know, I don't want to necessarily be in the front of anything. I'd sooner do stuff behind. So it wasn't until I started to get a bit more confident as I did get older. I
was just assuming, I was introducing you there, and I just kind of assumed everybody would know that you represented the Labour Party, because it is you're both Labour councillors.
Yeah.
But of course, there are councillors of other hues and traditions.
But my dad was a Tory.
Your dad was a Tory?
Yeah, well, he wasn't a Tory member, but he used to vote Tory. But I think that's partly because it was, you know, post-Second World War. Well, actually, he should have been voting Labour post-Second World War, but anyway. But I think it was more, he was a Christian, and...
He was a bishop as well?
Yeah, eventually, yeah.
Quite a well-known bishop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At some stage, yeah. Yeah, so that's why we moved around a bit. So he taught vicars, and that, I mean, what's really interesting for me is coming to Liverpool when I was 17, help out on the play scheme, then coming back for a year to help out at the Shoesy, which is just off Great Ormond Street. This is where, for me, I just thank the city, really, because my faith and my politics suddenly came alive. So, well, two things, really. One, as soon as you move away from home, if you're from a Christian family, which I am, you have to find your own faith. you know, because you find that you depend quite a lot on your family sort of bringing you up and teaching you stuff. So there I was in Liverpool on my own, trying to understand what kids were saying to me, because that was, you know, speaking very, very fast Scouse. So I got that eventually. But then realising that actually God is concerned with the whole of life rather than just us on a personal level, and is concerned about injustice, which I was seeing on every day. That's how I got involved with community politics. And that for me was completely mind-boggling. And also because you had to depend on God rather than your family. So, and I didn't know that many people in the community then. So it really was, you know, me and God, and I was going, wow, I'm struggling here. So it was a sort of a bit of a continuous conversation going on. So I grew up very quickly as a Christian in a different context, which then said, instead of God being over here and the world being over here, you know, this is God's world. God is concerned about society, about how people are treated, as well as, you know, our individual personal faith. So it was a very, very steep learning curve, which still continues. You know, that's what's great about.
And you're still relying on God.
Absolutely. God, yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to that later
yeah.
in regard to what's happening. But Lana, you're from a Catholic background, is that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, I was baptised Catholic. It's funny, I don't define myself as Catholic now. I just say Christian. So I suppose that's a bit of a journey in itself. But
Tell us about that.
I don't actually know why. I suppose you just start to, as you get older, start to think. Certainly from my point of view, I didn't necessarily start to think, you know, what would my Catholic priest do in this situation? It was a different, you know, what would Jesus do in this situation? And I suppose for me that was the progression. And I never necessarily felt as much of the link to the Catholic Church as I did when I was little. I just started to actually explore it in a different way, and I suppose looking at things like Acts and actually starting to read the Bible just took my faith in a different turn, actually a journey that I'm still actually on and still trying to figure out. So I think I've told you before, I'm not actually attending any church at the moment. I feel stronger in my faith, but I don't necessarily know how to direct in worship, I suppose, is the journey that I'm on. But yeah, was brought up in a Catholic household, very much. My mum's the linchpin of the family, and faith-wise, everyone in the family will go to my mum for advice, or if they're feeling a little bit low, she's the I think she's like the matriarch for the family. Yeah, she's the rock.
Yeah, that's so true of so many families, isn't it, really? And so was your faith a motivation in your political journey? Yeah,
definitely. I think when I graduated from university, actually, I didn't go straight into politics. I was training to be a religious education teacher. And it was I always had this fire in my belly that I wanted a career that was meaningful, and in that I suppose I mean had purpose. And I had my whole life mapped out. I thought I was going to be a teacher for 50, 60 years. I was going to love it. Before I even started the course, I had lesson plans planned for all the terms, really organised.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah, I really was. Like, I was
Lined
so
up,
excited.
nice and
Everything was colour coordinated, everything. And I remember the very first time I took a lesson on my own, and something just didn't click. And I remember it was actually the first point in my life actually where I had that fear, thinking, oh, I thought I had my future mapped out, and it's not as clicking together as I thought it would. And that was a real struggle for me actually, because on the one hand I thought not only was I feeling a bit like a quitter, that I was feeling like I wanted to come away from it. I was thinking, gosh, God's going to be disappointed. I've picked this whole career thinking, oh, this is going to please him. It's all to do with what I want to do. But somehow I didn't have the authority at the front of a classroom. I felt to start to really teach children about things that I thought were so important. So I started to reevaluate everything. But what never left me was that feeling of I want to have something that's a purposeful career. I want to do something that helps. That was always the word that just kept coming back in my head. I wanted to help. And there'd been a point for me when I was actually in sixth form where I was sitting in a religious lesson as a student. And there was a phrase that the teacher said, and it was called the active gospel. It just never left me when she was saying, it's not about reading the gospel, it's actually somehow how you actually play that out in your daily life, whether it's in your relationships with your family or whether it's in the workplace. And from that, I started to think, I'd love to get involved in politics, because for me, it seemed like in practical terms, that was the way you could really transform not only communities, but also there are things that you can do that can actually help someone's life, whether it's signposting someone for a job. I just thought that was something that really motivated me. So it was my faith, but also people. Because I suppose my faith, sometimes I can explain it through what I admire in other people. So when I used to look at my granddad and I'd think about all the things he'd done, or when I looked at the way my mum
So your
treats other
granddad was a
people.
person of faith as well?
I think towards the end of his life, I don't know how much early on, but certainly he used to go to church towards the end, and my other grandfather the same. But their qualities I thought of as actual faith qualities, even though they were never necessarily expressed like that. That's the way I understood them, was being a good person. A person of faith was actually going and acting out in your community.
Faith in action.
Exactly, yeah, that's what. So that was the motivator, those two things.
Okay, we're going to cut to our commercial break in a few moments. And when we come back, we'll just talk about the Christian tradition within the Labour Party, and then talk about the city and what's happening in the city and the pressures that we're under as a city. So join us after the break with Lana and Jane in Faith Matters. Welcome back to Faith Matters. Our theme today is faith in politics, and our guests are Lana Orr and Jane Corbett, City Councillors here in Liverpool. Now, I think it was Neil Kinnock who once said that the British Labour movement owed far more to Methodism than it did to Marxism.
Absolutely.
Have I quoted that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's true, isn't it, Jane?
Yeah, it is true. And it's quite interesting because people say, oh, you know, the Tory party is you know, the Tory party at prayer, the Christians are the... Actually, let's be honest here, look at the roots of the Labour Party, and they are from those Christian roots as they grew up. And I think that's one of the things that really attracted me to the Labour Party, because I was involved in community politics, as in community campaigning. I mean, 81, the reason I got involved was, and I joined a little thing called the West Everton Community Council, which is resident-led, and the church has helped set up alongside the community. So that idea of people, which is very much part of the Labour movement, of working alongside people, looking at where the injustice is and trying to change it and flip it on its head and get people involved together. And if you look at the way that God wants society to work, it's actually on the level. So the hierarchy is removed. So status is given by God. Everybody's unconditionally loved by God. So you suddenly get this flat grouping, if you like, in a flat society. So for me, joining the Labour Party was very much linking up with those sorts of roots and thinking everybody is unique and special. Everybody is made in God's image. So how does society then work for everybody? If you go back to the Old Testament, you can see it. You can see the way that society is meant to be working is everybody has a role, and then you all hold it tight, those roles. It's almost like a very strong net that the society becomes. Then the overarching hierarchy is only God. And God says, okay, love, mercy, and justice. And so I go back then to Martin Luther King, who's just think is superb, a Christian, you know, non-violent direct action. And one of his things was he used to say, have a tough mind and a tender heart, which comes from the verse about Jesus saying, go out and be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So I say, okay, tough mind, tender heart. That means we're not as Christians meant to be soft and, you know, just naive. We've got to get our brains in gear, but we've also got to have a heart filled with love, which is sometimes very difficult to keep that balance. And certainly in 81, the thing that kicked me off was living in a tower block on the 14th floor. None of the fire doors worked. We had 3 fires in a fortnight. The smoke came straight up the block. Luckily, we hadn't got any kids, me and Emily, by then, because I would have been completely freaked out at that point. I was freaked out enough as it was, but anyway. And then a whole load of us and when the smoke used to come under the door, the fire boys would just lift up the letterbox and shout through and go, if the smoke gets any worse, stand on the veranda. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So a whole gang of us in the block got together, and we went down to the housing office, who really, they were just not interested. It was a council block. It was like, and what? What's the problem? So we then went down to Committee Room A, I think it was, in the municipal annex. And so I suddenly realised, people in Liverpool are being treated really badly here and disrespected. Some people, particularly people in Everton, Vauxhall, Granby, areas that are already under massive pressure. And B, there was a lot of power that the council could actually wield in the right way. So who's using the power in the right way? Well, at the moment it's been not used in the right way. Should we get involved? So the community got involved. I wasn't looking to be a councillor at all, to be honest with you. I was on the panel for the following year in case I was needed, because they couldn't find many people. And in Everton, to get in, you either need to be born and brought up in the area or done at least 20 years voluntary work. Well, I'd done 20 years voluntary work. Not that people say that, but they go, yeah, she's all right, she's done loads of voluntary work, so actually, we might vote for her.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah,
it should be.
Yeah, it should be.
So, Lorna, just tell us, we're under huge pressure in
Yeah.
the city and in the region, because this station goes out to the region. The whole region's under pressure. What are the key issues? Where do you start?
The big issue, I think it can be summed up in one word, it's the budget. I think there's not a city councillor who isn't constantly thinking about that, because, it's not just one meeting a year where you sort of finalise the budget and that's it. When you're looking at cuts like Liverpool's had, the repercussions are massive. Every single service that the council presides over is hit by those cuts. And when you're thinking, it's not only sort of when you're sitting in the council chamber deliberating that, it's when you're going into your ward as well. You're in a community centre that have just had a cut in funding from the community funding they used to get, and how that's affecting the services that they're able to put on for people in your community who are having a really tough time as it is. As I say, just one word for me sums up the complete pressure, and it's the budget, because whether we like it or not, money is what sort of has to filter out in order to get these things going. So I think the pressure for not only councillors, actually, we were talking about this earlier, council staff as well, as on the one hand you feel like you're firefighting, you're having to really weather through that storm of, unprecedented cuts that no one ever would have really thought would be the reality. And then on the other hand, as well as weathering the storm, you're having to think of, the blue sky thinking as well. What is it that's going to make our city sustainable if these cuts are going to continue over the next 5-10 years? How are we actually going to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and protect people, as well as offer hope as well? Because that's a huge priority for us as an administration, is how are we offering hope as well as protecting people as well? How can people feel confident that they're able to go out and get a job, they're able to go and get an affordable home, they're able to feel confident in paying their bills? So you've got those two things that it's a constant balance. You're having to firefight, we have to, because it's that bad actually. But you're having to do the future planning and make sure that we're the ones who feel that we've got a direction for the city. So yeah, it's enormous.
And how are we going to cope, Jane, over the next 5 years? How are we going to do this?
I always say better times, worse times for Liverpool, and Joe says that as well, because there's fabulous stuff happening. City centre is amazing, but not only city centre. If you go out to Everton, Great Holmes Street is being transformed. By the time next autumn comes, we'll have a massive Sainsbury's there, we'll have new shops there, we'll have a health centre there, hopefully. We've got a brand new school there already. So the capital side of it, we're doing really, really well on. And we're using, for example, our big new build schools programme right across the city. We got an awful lot of apprenticeships out of that. We got a lot of local spend, a lot of local jobs, a lot of local training, because we had targets in that, and we drove them, and we actually outstripped our dreams, if you like, on that. A lot of Liverpool people did well out of that. What you're not allowed to do is use that capital funding for revenue. So I always say, well, why can't we use the money to build a school for actually running a shore start? You're not allowed to. The government won't let you because you're a council. Well, that in my head is just, that doesn't make sense. There should be, I understand about the debt and piling on and it looking like it's a big debt and all of that, but what it should be is, in these really difficult times, if the government are going to come at us like they are, and let's be honest, they have lots of choices, but they've chosen to cut councils particularly very hard, and they've chosen to cut councils like Liverpool and Hull and Manchester and all the core cities and the inner areas of London even harder than anybody else. Then they've got to have some flexibility there. For example, Hart in Hampshire has a cut of £28 per head of household. North Liverpool has a cut of £802 per head of household. Now that is, and if you then look at the child poverty figures, the cuts are highest where the child poverty is highest. It should be that way, and it's that way. Now, I think from a Christian point of view, that is totally unjust. So when I read the Bible, I think, right, you need to get in there and you need to fight with a tough mind and a tender heart to help sort this out, but alongside of people, not at people, alongside of people. So I helped set up the first Sure Start in Liverpool from a community base, and I used to be, you know, you've taken over the schools role, haven't you now, the primary school role. Looking at the Sure Start budget, we had to cut it from 14 million to 6.9 and then down to 1.9, and we brought it right back up to keep it as it is until April next year. And you say, well, great, Jane, you're a Christian and you're cutting that. We were then at that stage where we had practically no other choice. And people argue with us about that, and good on them, because I keep saying, campaign at us. Don't just go, can't do this, campaign at us. So there's some very good campaigns coming through on the Sure Start, and there still are.
That's great.
But that balance, and it's tipping, and we're getting now, this is the worrying bit for me, we're getting to the edge. There's very few places to go now.
I've got 1 minute. Lana, just how can churches help?
They already are. I think, you know, I'm on the board of a charity actually which has got a lot of church involvement where they're offering debt advice. They're signposting people about where they can go and get jobs. They're offering young mums who are in financial difficulty baby basic baskets where they've got a Moses basket and all the essentials that they're needing for when their baby's first born. And when I first got involved in that charity, I suppose I didn't necessarily realise the impact of seeing a person and the impact that can have on their life.
That's great. Thanks, Lana. Thanks, Jane. Thanks so much. We could talk for another half an hour at least, but we haven't got another half an hour. It's great to see you today and for you to take time out from your busy schedule to be with us.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Join us
Keith.
next time on Faith Matters.